Hey, world history. This is Miss Corey, and welcome to U9-L2 Basics of the Renaissance. So, in this video, this is the first of my lecture videos of the semester. So, welcome. I know a lot of you have been with me for semester one, so this is pretty familiar to most of you. So, just some basics before we begin. So, as you watch this Edpuzzle video, you are going to want to follow along with your study guide. Here's your study guide right here. Okay. So we are on lesson 2, Basics of the Renaissance. So as we go through the slideshow, there will be some words that are highlighted in red. Those are going to be vocab words. So you want to make sure that you're following along with the slideshow and putting those vocabulary definitions down on the study guide. Now, you have two choices when it comes to doing the study guide. The first choice is to write the definitions in your own words. So, for students who maybe are looking on going to higher education or just want the practice with note taking, that's an awesome way to practice. Is putting notes in your own words. That's awesome. That's great. I love it. For those of you who maybe struggle with note taking, what you need to do is you need to go back into the Unit 9 folder on Schoology and look for the pink resource folder. When you open up that pink resource folder, you will find that I have the slideshows in there. So you can just go through the slideshows and copy and paste the definitions into the study guide. Okay. And just a reminder, if you use another website or AI or anything to put in the definition to the study guide, it will be a 0. Even if you do it for just one vocab word and the rest are cool, you will get a 0 for the entire document. I don't like messing around with that kind of stuff. Okay. If you have any questions, please let me know. More than happy to help you. All right. So learning target. Students can explain the social, political, and economic changes in Europe. Also, throughout this Edpuzzle, you will see that I have some questions in blue text. Those questions in blue text are going to be questions I want you to answer directly on the Edpuzzle. So, here's an example of one. When you hear the Renaissance, what do you think of? So, some of you might think of a variety of things. One of the first things that pop into my mind would be like the Renaissance Festival. We have one here in Minnesota. It usually takes place in like the late summer, early fall. Here's a picture of what that looks like. You might think of pretty princesses with nice dresses. You might think of famous artwork like Mona Lisa. You might think of a lot of religious artwork because there was a ton of religious artwork. You might also think of cathedrals with their big domes. You might think of famous artists and inventors. You might think of statues as well. And yeah, in the Renaissance, there were a lot of naked paintings and statues. I don't know why, there just was. So prepare yourself. So here's our timeline. So we started off with Roman Republic and Empire. That was like Unit 4 in Semester 1. Then we talked about the Byzantine Empire. Then in the end of Semester 1, we talked about the Middle Ages. So we said the Middle Ages was from about 500 to 1500 CE, in Europe at least. And then we're going to add on the Renaissance. So the Renaissance started in about the late 1200s into the early 1600s. And you're probably like, wait, there's a lot of overlap between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. How can that be? Like, how can Europe have like these two eras going on at the same time? That's a really great question. So it's not like Europe changed overnight. It's not like everyone in Europe went to sleep, they woke up the next day and they're like, you know what? It's the Renaissance era. No, that's not how it worked. So when we think of the Renaissance, we have to think of it as kind of a slow spreading. So Middle Age Europe would be like all of this. The Renaissance is going to start right here in Florence, Italy, which is in the northern part of Italy. And it's going to slowly spread to the rest of Europe. Okay, so it's like a spreading, spreads out slowly. So what is the Renaissance? Renaissance means rebirth. So it was from about the late 1200s into the early 1600s. During this time period, scholars became interested and studied ancient Greek and Roman texts, art, philosophy, and architecture. So in the Middle Ages, there was very little interest in Roman and Greek texts. The reason for this is because Roman Greeks believed in like the Greek and Roman gods, and the Middle Ages was all about Christianity. Everything was Christianity. So there was no real need to research the Roman Greek text. During this time, there's also new discoveries in science, new forms of art and literature, new religion branch, being Martin Luther. You'll talk about him in U9-L4. There's also new political ideas. So there was a big fading away of feudalism we talked about at the end of semester 1. Feudalism during the Middle Ages was a really sad lifestyle where people lived on like these farms and they died on the farms and they would die really early and they had horrible hygiene, stuff like that. There's also new lands that were discovered, well, at least to the Europeans, and that would be the North and South America. So, where did the Renaissance all begin? It actually began at just one city and it spread from there. And that one city is Florence, Italy. So, you can see here on the map, it's kind of towards the upper part of Italy. It's not too far away from Rome. So, Florence, Italy was a very prosperous city. They focused on cloth making, but they also did things like paper making, glass blowing, as you can see here, ceramics, and sugar refining. So, they had a lot of like manufacturing and resources. So, in Florence, Italy, a new economic class emerged, and that new economic class was called merchants and bankers. So, that created a larger population of upper, middle to wealthy class in Florence, Italy. One of the big examples of the wealthy class would be the Medici family, and you'll learn more about them in U9, L7, L8, and L9. And they were able to afford luxuries and also invest in public works. So instead of just kind of hoarding all the money for themselves, they decided to spread their money through art. So they would hire like scholars to study ancient Rome and Greek texts and artifacts. They would also hire artists to make art for their homes, but they would also hire artists to make art for like the public, for public display, so everyone could see the awesome art. So you're probably wondering, like, so all of a sudden, all these people really wanted to study Rome and Greek texts. But there was this huge gap in the Middle Ages that no one really cared for Greek and Roman texts. So how did these Greek and Roman texts survive? I mean, they're on just like paper and paper decays. Like, I just don't understand how these people can research this after so many hundreds of years. Great question. So you can thank the Arab Caliphate for preserving these Greek and Roman texts. So from about 711 to 1492, the Arab Caliphates controlled Spain. So we talked about Arab Caliphates back in what, unit 6? But very briefly, so Arab Caliphates would be like Muslim controlled countries. And during this time period, they controlled Spain, which is on the southern tip of Europe. And some of these texts that the Arab Caliphate preserved included Plato and Aristotle's work. So if you think way back into, what was that unit? Was that unit 4 and a unit 3 beginning of unit 4? We talked about Plato and Aristotle being famous philosophers. Also preserved Greek texts on medicine, math, and geography, and Arab texts that also had where like Muslim scientists discovered and like theorized things as well. So another really important feature about Arab caliphates is that in Spain, they allowed all religions to live there, okay? Even though they're ruled by like Muslim countries, that did not mean everyone in that like ruling part had to be Muslim. They could be any religion. So it was a really big safe haven for the Jewish population. So a lot of Jewish scholars would transcribe these texts from Arabic to more common European languages. So then eventually more Europeans could also read these old Greek and Roman texts. During this time period, there was also a large rise in universities. So from about 1300 to 1500, there were 60 universities that were founded across Europe. So these universities held a rigorous standard. So they created teacher guilds, which set standards to what it meant to teach, but also what it meant to be a student at a university. So not just anyone could be a teacher, not just anyone could be a student. It would also create curriculum and final tests for degrees. And there was a longer time in school, the more like prestigious degree would get, which is still very true today. So if you're in school longer, you can get your master's or even your doctorate degree. So this is an example of one of the universities. This opened back in 1413. This is the University of St. Andrew, which is in Scotland, and it's still a university today. There's also some new science ideas. Now, a lot of these science ideas we take for granted, but in the Renaissance, this was like revolutionary. So the first one was Copernicus, and he argued that the sun was in the center of the solar system. Now, for you and me, that might seem like really basic. Like, didn't we learn that in kindergarten? But in the Renaissance, people weren't so sure. They thought that the Earth, which is represented by the blue dot, was in the center of the solar system. And then the sun and then Mars, which does a little loop de doop, would revolve around the Earth. But in reality, the sun was in the center of the solar system, and then Earth and Mars rotated around the sun. Okay, this is also called heliocentrism, and it was condemned by the Catholic Church, meaning the Catholic Church did not approve of it. There's also Galileo, who's this dude right here. He did some mathematical formulas on speed and velocity, gravity and freefall, the principle of relativity, inertia, projectile motion. And then there's this dude down here. His name is Kepler. He did the law of planetary motion, which is this fabulous looking mathematical formula here of how planets rotate around the sun. All right, next we're going to talk about utopia. So, utopia, it translates to be no place. And I'll explain why it's translate to that in the next slide. So, it came from Thomas More's book called Utopia. And More lived from about 1478 to 1535. He was a part of King Henry VIII of England's royal court. We'll talk about King Henry VIII in a little bit. He was also a writer and a lawyer, and he did not see Henry VIII as the head of the Church of England, which we'll talk about why in a few slides from now. So he was eventually beheaded. We will learn that King Henry VIII beheads quite a few people. So let's talk about utopia first before we talk about King Henry VIII. So Thomas More wanted to describe the perfect place. So he called it utopia. The reason why he called it utopia or no place is that he knew this place could never exist. Okay? In this perfect place, he thought that the government should be ruled by reason, not greed, status, or religion, and that the land should be owned by a state, eliminating the need for all social classes. Some other things that he thought of included study of criminal psychology, state-controlled education, every religion has a right to society, divorce, euthanasia of dying and terminally ill, and also women's rights. So let's talk about kind of more the reality of what were those gender roles in the Renaissance era. So the ideal characteristics of a man would be called a Renaissance man. So most of these characteristics came from this book. It's called The Courtier. And a Renaissance man, which would be like the perfect guy according to Renaissance standards, would be one that creates art. He is excellent in many academic fields. He's charming. He's witty, meaning he has quick humor. He's well educated. He can dance. He can sing. He can play music. He can write poetry. He can ride a horse. He's a wrestler. He's a swordsman. All of those things. On the flip side, you have the Renaissance woman. So this is the ideal characteristics of a woman during the Renaissance era, also from the Courtier. And she would have to be well educated in both Greek and Roman art and literature, be very charming, and she could inspire art. So she could fund art with her family's money, or she could be a model like this woman is right here, but she could not create art. Women were not seen as artists. And she would have little influence over politics. But there are always exceptions to the rule. One of the exceptions was this woman here. Her name was Isabella d'Este. Now, Isabella d'Este was part of a ruling family in the city-state of Ferrara. So Ferrara is this kind of little red area right here in northern Italy. And she married a man who was from Mantua, which is that blue little section right next door. And she would employ a lot of Renaissance artists and create this huge art collection. But she was also a ruler. So when her husband was captured at war, she was the one who ruled over Mantua, which is right there, and saved him from his capture. So she wielded a lot of power. So now let's talk about the Roman Catholic Church at this time. I know in last unit, when we left off semester 1, we talked a lot about the Catholic Church. This isn't so much information. So, power of the church. So, the church was considered secular. Secular means that the Catholic Church had considerable power in politics. So, they influenced politicians with support from the church. We talked about that a lot with like the Holy Roman Emperor and stuff. Also, influenced rich with offering powerful positions in the church. This is called simony. And also, money to raise armies, repair roads, and help the poor. So during the Renaissance, scientific studies became less secular, meaning that scientists would question religious beliefs and the teachings of the church. Before that, people would just accept the unknowns as workings of God. But during the Renaissance, there was a huge rise in the scientific method, and knowledge started to solve the unknowns, meaning that there was more and more of a separation between the science and the church. There was also kind of like a big power loss of the Catholic Church thanks to Protestantism. So Protestantism we'll talk more about in U9-L4, but a Protestant is a member of the Christian Church founded on the principles of the Reformation. The Reformation was started by this dude right here. His name is Martin Luther. And he was the founder of the Protestant movement, and he was against simony and the corruption of the church and politics. You also have kind of a loss of power with the Catholic Church with something called lay investiture. So, we're going to talk about King Henry VIII more in U9-L5, but I'll talk a little bit about him now. So, this is King Henry VIII. He was the King of England, and he practiced lay investiture. And that is when kings and nobles appoint officials to the church. But he did something pretty revolutionary. He actually separated himself entirely from the Catholic Church, which was pretty radical at the time. So King Henry VIII of England, okay, that dude right here. So one of his jobs as king is to produce a male heir to become the next king. So he marries a woman named Catherine. Now, Catherine only gives birth to one child in her life, and that child's name is Mary. Okay, and King Henry is really, really mad because Mary is a girl, so he wants a boy to be the next king. And Catherine didn't have any more children with him, so he wanted to divorce. So divorcing back in like the Middle Ages and Renaissance was really, really hard. It was pretty much impossible. So Henry wanted something called an annul, which was a loophole for divorce if anyone can say that the marriage was illegal. Now, this kind of like the Pope caught word of all of this, and the Pope was like, yo, King Henry VIII, your marriage was super legit. You cannot divorce Catherine. Like, there's just no way. Henry was so mad at the Pope and the Catholic Church, he completely broke away from the Catholic Church. So he had nothing to do with them anymore. And he started the Church of England. So England no longer was influenced by the Catholic Church. Instead, England was influenced by their own church called the Church of England. And once he created the Church of England, he would appoint bishops. All right, so this unit we'll talk about all these things. I know there's a lot going on here. I'll explain a little bit more about them in a bit. But next up is U9-L3, Art of the Renaissance. Now, in the last couple of years that I've taught this course, I typically do a slideshow about art in the Renaissance, but honestly, I don't know a lot about art. So this video that you're going to watch next is by Rick Steves. So Rick Steves is like this tour guide and TV show host. You can find him on PBS. He's on like channel 2 for us Minnesotans. So as you watch this video, there is no need to take notes on the study guide, but this video is still very important because there's a lot of vocabulary words. So even though you don't have to write down the definitions to the vocabulary words, please pay attention to this video because there are a lot of vocab words you can use for the Unit 9 summative, okay? This video will be really helpful for the Unit 9 summative. During this video, there's also a lot of topics that appear that I have not touched on in this class, so you might be a little confused about like what the heck he's talking about. So I'm going to talk about those topics right now. The first topic is the Medici family. So I talked about them a couple of times before this, but they were a very powerful family who ruled Florence, Italy from the 1400s until the 1700s. And they made their wealth through banking. So they're bankers. They're also patron of the arts, which is a wealthy supporter of the arts. So they would pay money to an artist to make art. And you will learn more about that family in U9-L7, L8, and L9. There's also a lot of biblical stuff, so things from the Bible or the Christian religion. So I'm going to go through just a couple of them here. They're really basic things, but I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page and not lost when watching this video. So the first thing is David and Goliath. So David and Goliath is a biblical story, meaning it's from the Bible. It's from the book of Samuel, which is in the Old Testament. So Goliath is this really big, large soldier. And David is this really young shepherd man and also an Israelite. So Israelites are the people who would become the Jews. So Goliath was in an army, and they wanted to conquer the Israelites, which is where David was from. So David decided to battle Goliath by himself, and he was only armed with a slingshot and ended up killing Goliath. David would then go on to become the king of Israel. Okay, you will see this story a lot in Renaissance art. You will also see a lot of depictions of Mary and Jesus. So we learned a little bit about this in Unit 4 Rome when we talked about Christianity, but a refresher. So Mary is the mother of Jesus, according to Christians. Christians believe Jesus to be the Son of God and the Messiah or Savior. In the video, you will hear the word Madonna a few times, and I am not talking about the singer. So Madonna in Renaissance art is when Mary is depicted in art, she is called Madonna. And she can be depicted with or without Jesus. You will also see John the Baptist in a lot of the pictures. John the Baptist was Jesus' cousin and a Jewish preacher, and he's often depicted in art alongside Jesus. Here's another very important theme in Renaissance art, and that is the Last Supper. This is also another biblical story. So this is when Jesus was a wanted man for treason by the Roman Empire. And before Jesus was arrested, he and his 12 followers or 12 apostles had dinner. At that dinner, Jesus said that one of the apostles would betray him by giving the Roman Empire Jesus's location. And as you can see in this picture here, and Rick Steves will talk more about this picture, but they're all like, what? Who would betray you? How dare they? Everyone's like kind of up in a panic, except for this dude right here, because that's Judas. He was one of the apostles, and he was the one who betrayed Jesus for some cash. There's also the crucifixion. That is another Christian term, but it's also more a historical term because that is when someone is killed by being nailed to the cross, which a cross would be made out of wood and like a T-shape. Jesus was not the only one in history to be crucified. This was a very common practice with the Persian Empire as well as the Roman Empire. So Jesus was killed via crucifixion. And in art, in Renaissance art, you will see the Pieta a lot. So a Pieta is when art depicts Mary holding Jesus after he's dead and taken down from the cross. So you will see that in the video. So next up, you're going to do U9-L3, Art of the Renaissance Ed Puzzle. You're going to watch the video and answer the questions directly on the video. Then you have U9-L4, Lutheran Reformation. That is not one of my videos. That is oh my gosh, John Green video. I love John Green. He does a really great job. Sometimes he speaks a little fast, but so do I, so can't judge. Watch the video and answer the questions directly on the video. Then the next two, so pay attention right here. There are two U9-L5s. You need to do them both. Okay, if you miss one, it'll be missing and then you'll be absent. So make sure you do both King Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth I. Then we will meet back with one of my videos on Renaissance writers. Of course, if you have any questions, comments, or want to learn more, please email your teacher. We are here to help you. Thanks for watching. Bye.